Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's very good.
So I'm wearing my pink
Yeah.
to represent it's Sakura season.
Oh, is that why? Okay, I was wondering why you're wearing a pink shirt.
I mean,
Did you do Hanami?
I've done it once so far.
Okay.
I went to Ueno Park with some coworkers.
You went to Ueno Park?
Ueno Park?
Come on, man, say Ueno Park.
No.
Yeah,
No.
it's not Ueno.
No, it's Ueno.
W-A-Y-N-O. That's
Ueno,
not
man.
what it is. It's not
I
Ueno.
don't care. That's how I want to say it.
Jeez. Yeah, Mr. Bouquet. I'm gonna
Oh
bring
my
that. I'm gonna
God.
bring that up. I'm gonna bring that up, man, every time.
Okay.
So Austin cannot speak English correctly.
That is an opinion that I disagree with. Don't get out of here with your colonial oppression of having proper English.
Yeah, well, hey, you know what? We for the vast majority of the time of America,
Yep.
the Northeast was the correct dialect.
Yep. And then they switched to something more comprehensible and less nonsensical. And
Yeah,
they never came back.
Surfer language. Hey, man, how's it going?
Yeah.
You know, and I'll get that. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about different regions in the United States.
Yeah. And kind of the cultures and more specifically, the opinions of them,
Yeah.
of each other.
How they think about each other. Kind of like, Osaka versus Tokyo. We're going to be talking about stuff like that.
Yeah. So
I think a good place to start would be, let's talk about our cultural backgrounds in our regions of the states,
Sure.
Pacific Northwest and
Yeah.
the Northeast.
all right. So I'll start. So I'm a West Coast guy. Through
Totally.
and through. I was born and raised in Seattle. I've never even been to the East Coast. As weird as that is
That's
to
a
say.
shame.
Yeah. I'm going to go off on a small tangent here because I recently just learned some information, and I'm going to be paraphrasing this, so this isn't exactly completely accurate, but I learned that something crazy like 70 or 80% of the U.S. population is on the East Coast.
Yeah, totally.
And 20% of it's on the West Coast.
Mhm.
And then like 10% of it's like in
Yeah.
between.
Well, dude, so to be honest though, so if you go to the Boston area,
Yeah.
you will find lots of houses that are not very big,
Mm-hmm.
that are really like scrunched up together, really close.
Yeah.
And it's because the population is too dense.
Yeah.
You know?
So I'll tell you why that felt so weird for me to learn that information, because this is kind of pertaining to my culture and kind of like the culture of West Coast people. Is West Coast people think of ourselves as our own thing.
Mhm.
Like, of course, we're all Americans, but like, we really don't really feel like we're connected to East Coast and Middle America at all.
Yeah.
There's very few things that people on the West Coast tend to like really identify with. Looking at those cultures,
It's like that in Northeast too.
is it?
Yeah.
And so when I learned that, like, the vast majority of the American population was on the East Coast, I was really taken aback by that, because like, I've never, like, if you go to Seattle or if you go to California, you won't experience a feeling like, at least if you're going in like the popular areas, you won't experience a feeling like you're not in a crowded place.
Yeah.
You will do that if you go to Oregon. Oregon, I think, is the exception, but Oregon's kind of this weird place anyway. But
Yeah,
like,
Portland is probably one of the weirdest places in the United States.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But like, if you're in like Southern California, you wouldn't imagine that the East Coast is more populated there.
Why?
I don't know, man.
Are you sure that's not
It's
just
like,
because you've never been to the East Coast, man?
I mean, maybe, but it's like my perception of the East Coast has always been like this old place, right?
You were not wrong,
Right?
You were not wrong.
So yeah. So like, we'll kind of transition this a little bit into kind of like West Coast people's perception of East Coasters. They're arrogant pricks.
So you think people from the East Coast are arrogant pricks?
Yeah. So it's like, the vision, or like the person you imagine when you're an East Coaster is like a New Yorker.
Yeah.
Or a Bostonian.
Bostonian.
There we go. you know? So like New Yorker is like, you know, the, hey, I'm walking here kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the Boston guy where it's like, they just sound like they're from Family Guy.
Yeah.
Well, hey, how it going, everybody?
He's actually from Rhode Island, so he's very, anyways, we don't have to get into that, but yeah.
So it's like, it's like there's these caricatures of people that like, I feel like as a person from the West Coast, that's just who we see.
Yeah. I'll give a little bit of like cultural historical background on this stuff, because unlike you, I've been in both places and I've spent multiple years in both places, but also I've spent a decent amount of time in the South, like this South Carolina, the South. Yeah. But so of course the Northeast is where the United States started. Yes. The Navy started in my hometown, actually, and there are many houses that are about 300 years old. It's the way that the Navy started is kind of contentious. The first sea-based battle in the United States was fought in my hometown. Okay. Let's just say that. Okay. And what you ended up having is a lot of people moved to the colonies, and the colonies had hundreds of years of history, and then about like 200 years into it, because actually, you know how when you go into a town and you cross the town lines, it says town incorporated, and then it has the year on it. They have those in Northwest, right? Yeah, they do. Yeah. So mine says 1629 on it. You know? Yeah, I know. It's a long time ago.
All the ones on the West Coast are like 1800s, maybe early 1900s sometimes.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening is they got really populated and it became tough to live there. Things got more expensive. So a lot of people were like, I want to live my own life. I want to live free. I want to have land. And the government was trying to populate the whole state coast to coast, the whole country coast to coast. Yeah. And so they just gave out land really cheaply. And so you have a lot of, I would say a lot more business and cold people would be on the east, especially the northeast.
I would agree. Yeah.
And the people on the northwest are the people who live more freely, are more flexible. They just want to live their own lives, I feel.
Yeah, historically, I would say that like West Coast mentality is very much like frontiersman. Yeah. Like I don't want to be part of like the establishment. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like where you see a lot of people, you know, rioting against the government. Yeah. A lot of that happens on the West Coast. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Like a lot of the more progressive aspects of American culture started on the West Coast. Yeah. A lot. Yeah. And just for anybody who's interested, at least watch the first episode of Portlandia. Have you ever seen Portlandia?
I haven't. I know of the show though. Yeah.
Like the first episode, man, it kind of reminds me of what Seattle used to be before all the Amazon bros moved into it. But it's just, there's a slogan in Portland that says, keep Portland weird. And I remember, like, if you type in Portland on Google Images, or you type in Portland weird, you'll find a picture of a guy with a Darth Vader mask from Star Wars riding a unicycle in a kilt, playing the bagpipes with fire coming out of them. Yep. And it's just like, yeah. And then another thing, so moving over to the West Coast, where I thought was really strange, was in Seattle, is in Fremont, there's just this giant concrete troll under a bridge.
Oh, you're not going to mention the statue of Stalin?
There's a statue of Stalin there too.
Like literal from Russia.
Yeah. And in Fremont, they have like a naked biking festival every year, which is kind of unheard of on the Northeast.
Yeah, Fremont's kind of known as like a weird place. Yeah. Like even amongst Seattle, because Seattle can be pretty weird sometimes. But so yeah, the Seattle Troll, I actually don't know the history of.
They just built it because they thought it would be cool.
Okay.
That's the only reason why.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I feel like that's kind of how everyone treats it too. They're just like, oh, look at that.
Yeah, there's no significance. Just, hey, it would be cool. Like, okay, Leavenworth in Washington. Yeah. So I thought Leavenworth was the way it was because there were a lot of German immigrants, or there was some reason to that. It was a dying, almost Midwestern town, and they said, we need to do tourism. Let's change our name, and let's do a German theme. And that was it. Yeah,
that was literally it.
That's so disappointing, man.
Well, it's kind of even more funny if you think about like the racial demographics of who typically, it's specifically in the Northwest. Yeah, the Germans really don't settle there.
They're more like Middle America.
Yeah,
right?
So if you look at like the white people that ended up moving into the northwestern region of the US, it's like predominantly Nordic.
Yeah, Nordic. Yeah. That was another thing that was so weird. When I went to okay, I said Baltimore, Bellevue, Ballard. It's Ballard. When I went to Ballard, and they have like the Scandinavian national flags up there, and they have a Nordic Scandinavian festival every year or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, coming from Boston, because there's so many Italians and Greeks and also a lot of Puerto Ricans there too. There's just, it's much more like southeastern Europe is there.
Yeah.
And when I came to Seattle, I'm like, there's a lot of blonde hair, blue eyed people here. This is weird.
Yeah. It's really crazy. We also have a lot of like a really large Slavic population for some reason.
Yeah.
So like you'll see like a lot of like Polish and Russian and Ukrainian people also.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Like it doesn't like geographically it doesn't make sense.
So I have a question for you. So on the West Coast in the Seattle area, is there a lot of like infighting between regions and
actually, and like I said, I haven't been to the East Coast.
Yeah.
Okay. The furthest I've been is like New Mexico.
New Mexico, okay.
Yeah. So I haven't really traveled around America all that much, but from what I gather talking with people, and especially being in the military, you get exposed to people from everywhere, and specifically Texas, which is annoying. But what it seems like is it seems like the people on the West Coast feel like the most unified of the groups.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
No, I would think so, because we're talking about how different regions think about each other. And I was thinking, okay, how does the East Coast think about the West Coast? And actually, they don't really think about the West Coast very much. Like Boston thinks about New York way more than they think about the West Coast or whatever. And even in the Northeast, so technically where I'm from, the region is called New England. Yeah. Because that was the original part. New York is not part of that, actually. And even it's like on the border.
Really?
And actually, it was settled by the Dutch. Okay. So it was originally called New Holland originally.
Yeah.
But it's still East Coast. It's just not part of New England. But even in New England, depending on the state where you're from, they're like, oh, you're from New Hampshire, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, you're from Vermont. You're one of those Vermont people, huh? You know, there's a lot of infighting, kind of antagonism there.
I've heard that like people outside of New Jersey really don't like people from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, like, okay. Stuff like that.
Well, okay, yeah. So New Jersey is Saitama, you know.
Okay.
Basically just everyone, you know, they call it Dasaitama, you know.
It does. I've never heard that.
Oh, you've never heard that
That's
before?
Hilarious. I really like that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the same thing, you know. It's it's like that with New Jersey. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just when I think about kind of the cultural background of the two regions, you know, in the West Coast was really populated during the gold rush. Everyone was moving over, so you have that frontiersman kind of feel there.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the East Coast, at least in the Northeast where I'm from, they developed through industry a lot. The industry was very much more developed, and they got a lot of raw materials from the West Coast.
Yeah. It definitely seems like that, because it's like you look at America. First of all, I mean, it's really important to really highlight how short American history is compared to pretty much anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada kind of falls into the same boat, but there's basically no other place in the world that has as short of a history as the US.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history, it's roughly 280 years at this point.
Yeah.
And even more specifically, like the modern US map is only like 100 to 150 years old.
Well, I mean, Alaska and Hawaii were added in the 50s.
Yeah.
You know, that was 70 years ago.
And the West Coast, I mean, Washington wasn't even a state until like, what, 1860 something?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I remember because I remember going on the underground tour in Pioneer Square in Seattle, and they were talking about the history, and they said, in 1850, this guy came and started Seattle.
Yeah.
1850? 1629,
it's
man.
Like, dude, that's like basically the Civil War.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's so crazy to think about that, but it's so true because by the time the West Coast was actually a thing, the Civil War was done.
Yeah.
So you had two completely opposing cultures and sides in the United States fighting a full-fledged war.
Yeah.
And then you go over to the West Coast and everyone's just kind of like, we're cowboys, woohoo!
Yeah, it's like, I don't know what we're doing. I just want to live my life, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really different.
Yeah, so I think, you know, when I mentioned earlier where like the West Coast doesn't really associate themselves with like the other part of the United States, I think that has a big part to do with it because like you guys have had so much time to really like flesh out an identity and a culture.
And also be very exclusionary based on that identity too, I think.
That's true.
Yeah. No, because like I remember going to Seattle just feeling how everyone was so chill and just free flowing. Yeah, you know, do what you want. That's fine. Not judging you. You can do whatever you want. Whereas on the East Coast, like, what the fuck you think you're doing?
Yeah.
You know, just like, of course, people swear a lot there too.
Well, that definitely connects with like the industry and cowboy culture, right? Cowboy culture is just like people coming over to the West Coast is just like, okay, well, I'm just gonna try and not die.
Yeah,
that's my goal.
So Austin, I want you to try and mentally draw a map of all the different regions in the United States.
Okay, so first of all, I mean, like I've mentioned, we have the West Coast on the west side. You have, I would say, from Texas to Florida and everything in between. So that's
like the south part.
Yeah, so Texas is like the center-south area of the United States. And then Florida's like, depending on who you talk to, it's either the penis or the armpit of America.
Well, it does look like one of those.
but yeah, so it's like you have, it's the bottom east peninsula of the United States, right? And so from Texas to Florida, and everything in between that's more or less known as the South, right? And then the East Coast is broken up between, you have the East and the Northeast, right? And I'm going to be honest and I'm going to show my ignorance. I don't know where that line ends.
So officially, the North becomes the South on the Mason-Dixon line, which goes across Washington, D.C. So the reason Washington, D.C. is the way it is because it was the meeting point between the North and the South, so neither side would have too much representation. At least that's what it was in theory.
So anything north of D.C. is Northeast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything south of that is just South. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you have that broken up.
Yeah.
And then anything that I didn't list is basically more or less lumped into the Midwest.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you're not specifically on the West Coast, you kind of get lumped into the Midwest, even though you're not really part of it. But the cultural wise, I feel like they identify more with Midwest culture than either of the coasts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be a little bit more nuanced than that, I think.
Yeah.
But like, because in the South, so just to tell you, so my mom was from South Carolina, which was the state that led the Confederates in the Civil War.
Yeah.
You know? So even today, like I told you in another episode, when I first moved to the United States and I would visit my dad's hometown in Boston, I'd visit my mom's hometown in South Carolina.
Sure.
I thought America had two flags, depending on the region. You had like the Confederate flag was for the southern states. And
Man,
that's what I thought because I saw it everywhere, you know?
It is so insane to me that the Confederate flag still exists.
Yeah. Well, they've spun a nice yarn about what they think it means.
Yeah.
Why it's like that.
Yeah. I know. We don't have to get into that, but it just deep. Blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, I have a mom who believes that narrative, you know, and I went to school and I was taught a different narrative.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the South, though, because I think it's really important to distinguish between that kind of the side that fought in the Civil War versus the rancher Texas style, Texas person. So like when I think of Texas, I think of a cowboy, you know, with the, what is it called? 10-gallon hat, 9-gallon hat, 5-gallon hat?
10-gallon hat.
10-gallon hat. Okay.
Yeah.
10-gallon hat. And like the cowboy boots and stuff. But that's Texas, right?
Yeah.
And that's very different from South Carolina, which is much more, I would say almost tropical and much more colonial, a lot more wood houses. And, you know, there was a lot of slavery there. There wasn't as much slavery in Texas. But I feel like if you go from from the East Coast down to about Louisiana, that area, that's what you can call the Old South, the traditional South. And then anything beyond that to like Texas and that kind of, I would even include New Mexico's kind of weird, actually. New Mexico's its own thing.
Yeah.
Just that area is kind of like what I would call the ranch area.
Yeah.
And then you also have, you say the Midwest, but you also have like the Southern Midwest, which is, I feel like a lot more, but North Dakota also has Mount Rushmore and has like the Dakotas have a large native population too. But yeah, I guess when I think about Midwest, I think about you have snow country, like Wyoming and Minnesota.
Sure.
And they're known for cheese and snow.
Yeah.
And oh gosh, or whatever you call it.
Yeah, they have
don't ya know, like the accent. But yeah, there's a lot of variety in there, like you said. But I feel like, I don't know, I've experienced a bit too much.
Okay, I mean, I did paint with a fairly large brush, but I feel like the reason why I said what I did was because I think like if you look at places like Nevada, Idaho, Montana, like places like those, I feel like they have more in common with people from like Minnesota.
Oh, that's true.
You know what I mean? They have more in common with that than they do with people who are from the South or from either of the coasts.
Yeah.
So that's why I lumped them in.
No, that's true. I think, once you get past Pennsylvania, it's just like fields, farmland, and ranches, and nature. Yeah, no, I can understand that.
Yeah. And more of a, like it definitely, you definitely see this when as soon as you start like viewing regions based off their political identity. That's when you really start to see like real common connections and stuff.
So where do you think like the traditional Japanese concept of American, like what region of the United States do you think that?
Honestly, I think California.
I agree.
Because like when you talk with a lot of Japanese people here, it's like, what is the history of America? Oh, cowboys.
Cowboys, yeah.
That's like the number one thing that gets brought up when I ask a person here about American culture. It's like the number one thing is cowboys.
Yeah. When I think of cowboys, I think of Texas though.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like for me, I think of like California, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure they did have a lot of like vaqueros, a lot of like cowboys there too, but I don't know, just maybe it's because they still wear the cowboy hats in Texas.
That might be. Yeah, I mean, Texas definitely like really leans into the cowboy aesthetic. Yeah. So that's fair. But like, yeah, for me, it's like when I think of cowboys, I think of like Arizona and California.
Okay, yeah, Arizona definitely fits into that too.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyways, so it's like they think of America as like this desert climate, cowboy culture.
Yeah.
Everyone's got guns, which is actually pretty true.
In Texas, yes.
And like the next thing that they'll mention is like surfers.
Okay, yeah.
So like for like those two aesthetics, and geographically speaking, California is the closest part of America to Japan.
Other than Hawaii.
Okay, like mainland America. It's hard to even really count Hawaii as part of America.
Hawaii is like its own thing.
Yeah, it's like Hawaiians don't even want to be called Americans. Like,
it was. Have you been to Hawaii before?
Yes.
Yeah, it was so weird for me because I'm on this island that if you look at the flora and fauna or whatever, it's totally not America.
No.
But it has all of like the highway signs are like the American style. And it's like the signs are American. It's so weird.
It really, I might say something that's a little controversial on this channel, but it really feels like Okinawa's kind of in a similar boat where it's like you go and talk with Okinawans and it's like, yeah, I'm sure if you really pushed it, they would say they're Japanese. But like for me, when you talk to a person from Okinawa, they'd be like, I'm Okinawan. Yeah. You know what I mean? It has that vibe.
Yeah. So you have that too. One thing that I also want to talk about is we talked about the Civil War a little bit and that stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of Southern people, even like maybe amongst baby boomers or maybe the generation after that.
Yeah.
They have like a huge they have a very, very low view of Yankees, of Northerners.
Yeah.
And so if I talk like this or you talk like this, they'll be, oh, you're a Yankee.
Yeah.
What are you doing here?
Yeah.
Why'd you come here? You know? And they think about how the Southern culture of the plantation owners was so prim and proper and was so elegant, and it was much more of a higher culture that the North forced the South to let go of. And there's still a lot of pent up frustration with that.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting you brought that up because it's really weird how the different regions in America kind of deal with each other.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a lot of friction nowadays specifically because of that. So like you have the South, which because of the Civil War holds a lot of resentment for the North.
Yeah, even though the Civil War was like 150 years ago, 160 years ago. Yeah.
But it was such a drastic and radical cultural shift that I think it caused a lot of trauma, which, I mean, we don't have to get into a whole lot, but I don't feel like it's undeserved.
Yeah. Right.
Slavery is bad.
Slavery is bad.
Right?
Yeah.
But so you have that resentment, and I think the North does not hold that resentment. I think more so because they won the war.
Yeah. But let me ask you though. So when you imagine an idiot, like a really stupid person just talking.
South.
What accent they have a Southern accent. Yeah.
Yeah. Down country bumpkin.
Well, it's like,
you know,
it's like so George W. Bush was made fun of a lot because he did say some stupid stuff, but a lot of it was also he had a Southern accent.
Well, specifically a Texan accent.
Southern accent.
And
you can't mess with Texas.
I think when people think of a stupid person, they specifically think of a Texas accent.
Yeah.
I think part of that is because Texas personality and Texas culture is very like bombastic and like really like
bold.
Yeah. Right. And it's like, I'm from Texas.
Yeah.
And everyone gets so tired of that in the US, like, oh my God, shut up.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the mentality that a lot of people have towards Texans. And so like when somebody speaks with a Texas accent, like you just assume they're dumb.
Well, you know, it's funny because in my hometown, one of my friend's mom is Texan, originally from there. And she wears cowboy boots. She doesn't wear the hats, but she has a really strong Texan accent.
Yep.
And she told me stories about how she was telling about herself to someone, and this was in the Boston area, right? And the woman she was talking with just said, you know, I knew you would say something about how you never finished your education so well because of your accent.
Yeah.
And like just full out, it's okay to make fun of Southern people.
Yeah.
You know, with Southern accents. That's at least in the North, that's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. And I would even go so far as to say like it's heavily viewed negatively throughout the US, including the West Coast, right? So much so that if a person with an accent from Texas or to a lesser extent some of the other southern states that tend to have strong accents, if you go into any sort of like media, like for example broadcasting or TV or something, you have to go through rigorous training to lose that accent before you'll be like accepted into mainstream media. You will never find anybody in mainstream media that talks with that accent.
What do people from Seattle think about like the Boston accent? Peter Griffin?
Yeah. Okay. It's Peter Griffin.
From Family Guy?
Yeah. Either that or Marky Mark.
Marky Mark? Marky Mark.
Mark Wahlberg.
So if someone has like a Boston accent, what kind of stereotype is there?
So you just think they're an asshole.
Which is not inaccurate.
Like that's just the common like view that I think West Coasters have towards New Englanders, and I think we tend to lump New Yorkers with New Englanders.
Yeah. Well, because it's still the Northeast.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's like the mentality. It's like, oh, this guy's just a dick.
You know, it's funny because so you know, Boston has the #1 universities in the world. And a lot of the Ivy Leagues, the #1 schools, are all in the Northeast. Like you got Yale, Brown. Is Brown's in? I think Brown's in the Northeast. If it's not, I'm wrong. But even in Boston, you have so many universities.
Yeah.
And you have this really well-educated group, but the real heart of Boston is...
MIT's there too, right?
MIT is right.
Yeah.
MIT is 2 stops away from Harvard. You can walk there in about 20 minutes.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And
that's like considered like literally the brain center of the world.
Yeah, and I will tell you, because I used to meet a lot of people from Harvard because it's just local and I could go to events or whatever. And whenever I met a student from Harvard, I was thinking, oh, you got into Harvard? You seem pretty normal, you know? But then when I talked with someone from MIT, they always had the most interesting topics of discussion. And I was just like, man, this guy is so smart, you know?
Yeah.
But anyways, that aside.
Yeah.
But I feel like the big kind of where the idea of everyone being rude and a jerk comes from is because there's a really strong working class in Boston. You know, right now Boston's getting gentrified, and so things are getting super expensive. But you know, because the Northeast is one of the oldest areas in the country, it's also part of the oldest industry areas.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, sorry to cut you off. I was gonna say, like, when you think of like factory towns in America, you think of New England.
Yeah, right. Oh, even really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's totally how it is. Like Salem.
Yeah.
Where my dad's office is an old factory town full of old brick buildings that they're starting to redo. But that's kind of a big issue that's happening now, is because all of these traditional industries no longer getting any business because the jobs are shipped overseas. So you have a lot of these people really struggling, you know? Yeah. Like even, what is it? So the town that my grandfather grew up in was called Lynn, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And they have a saying there. It's called Lynn, the city of sin. You never go out the way you came in. And originally, it was the shoe manufacturing center of America. They had so many shoe shops up until the 1930s. Really?
Okay.
And then after that, the business went to other places.
Yeah.
And now it's known for being super crime ridden, super dangerous.
So it kind of had like a Detroit.
Yeah. It's like Detroit, and it's not getting any better, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a lot of that in Boston. So you have a lot more rough types. And I think that's where the rude image comes from, you know?
I definitely feel like the mentality, and I think this can honestly get traced all the way back to like the Pilgrim times, is like when you think of like Northeasterners, you think of them as a very hard people.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you definitely, I would say more so than any other region in the US, like if you think of somebody as tough, like it's like that area.
Yeah. You know, it's really funny. So back when I was still a ryugakisei, so this is 10 years ago, I was trying to find a teacher. I was about to leave Japan and go back to the United States, and I was trying to find a teacher who could replace me. I was doing English lessons at this asset management company or whatever in Jimbocho, and I wanted to find another teacher. And so I put out a job listing, and a guy from Malden, Massachusetts, which is a 25-minute drive from my house, applied. And it was so cool. Like, I was in a cafe and it was a virtual call interview, but I remember calling him, and he had a beard, and he was like, "Hey, how you doing? Yeah, nice to meet you. I've been in Japan for 5 years. I've been teaching all over the place. I teach at a school. Yeah, I got all this education." And I was trying to be nice to him, you know, and I was thinking, oh, you know, you're from Malden. You know, I'm from the Boston area too. I'm from Salem. Yeah. What made you leave Malden? His answer was, "You ever been to Malden?" And then I was asking him about like how he thinks about putting lesson topics together or something. Yeah. And I think he didn't like the fact that I was much younger than him, but he's the only person where he said, "Yeah, you know, I don't think this is good for me, so I'm just going to go bye." And he just stopped the call. Just like, what? Like, that's
not supposed to do that.
You're not supposed to do that. But that is like, that's so that area, you know?
Yeah.
like I remember, what was it? Like another time I was in a mall somewhere, and in the mall there were like columns or something. Sure. And there was this one lady walking this way, and I was walking on the other side of the column, and as I was walking, she kind of turned this way, and she didn't see me because the column was in the way. It was a big column. Yeah. And so she like almost comes face to face with me and almost bumps into me, and she's like, "Whoa, you scared the shit out of me." I'm just like, you talk like that to strangers? Okay.
That's fun.
Yeah.
So who I'm curious what your opinion is, because I'll give you my opinion after I hear yours. Who do you think? So we've talked about like the East Coasters and how they connect. Who do you think would connect the most with the West Coast?
What do you mean? Who would connect?
Like regionally speaking, which other region do you think connects with the West Coast?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand. Connects in like what way? Like is similar to?
Maybe you could think of it as similarities, but I think has more in common with, because I think they're like the regions all identify with different things, but I think you see that some regions can not necessarily get along with, but I think have more in common with another region than other parts of the U.S. So I'm curious what you would think.
Yeah, so that's really tough.
If you can't think of,
you tell me.
So this right off the bat, you wouldn't really kind of make these connections, but I think the West Coast and Texas actually have
really
significantly more in common with other parts of the U.S.
Why?
So, I mean, first off, on a surface level, you have this like ranch and cowboy like background, but something that's really unique to Texas is the fact that they have openly stated that they don't want to be part of the United States.
Okay, yes.
Right?
Okay.
And at a point, they actually did separate from the United States and became their own country and absolutely failed and got annihilated by Mexico and asked for the U.S. to come save them. But that's a long story.
Yeah.
But you have this kind of rebellious anti-establishment mentality in Texas that I think a lot of West Coasters often find camaraderie in.
Yeah. But also, Texas is super conservative, except for Austin. And the West Coast is super liberal.
So, from a really, really like zoomed out viewpoint, yes. Yeah. But actually, a very big chunk of the West Coast is very conservative, just not population-wise.
Okay.
So, like, the majority of the population tends to lean towards liberal, like Democratic side. But as soon as you get out of the city, it's all red.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like that in Oregon with Portland and stuff too.
Yeah. Portland, Washington, California, they're all the same. As soon as you get out of the city, it's just all Republican.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's also like that in Massachusetts too. So like Boston is super liberal, first state in the country to legalize gay marriage.
Yeah.
And you drive 30 minutes west and you get past a town called Worcester. It's mainly farmland.
Yeah.
And it's super conservative. I remember driving through there and I saw a barn, and on the side of the barn was painted the message, "Trump is right."
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what do you think, like, do you think the religions are separated regionally, or do you think there's a lot of spillover?
So I would,
because I actually think they're separated regionally.
I would say they're separated regionally based on mainly the ethnicities of the settlers.
Okay.
That's a big part.
Yeah.
Like you have the Amish in Pennsylvania and stuff like that. Have you, oh yeah, you've never been to Pennsylvania. So you've never seen like a "watch out for horse and buggy" sign on the road?
No, God,
oh yeah, you have those in Pennsylvania because of the Amish. Yeah.
Dude, I Amish people, so it's really weird, like, when I hear about Amish people, because they seem like this, like, made-up fairyland group of people.
Can you explain what Amish people are?
So Amish people, and I'm going to go super surface level. I've never met an Amish person in my life. I've just heard about them, like, through history textbooks and stuff. They're very, very fundamentalist Christian groups that, for lack of a better way of explaining, basically forego technology and live off the land.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
That's correct. Yeah. So they were extreme Christian sect that moved to America.
Yeah.
To avoid persecution, mainly German. And they moved to America, and they think technology gets in the way. Mainly technology based on electricity gets in the way of their relationship with God.
Yeah.
So they don't use electricity.
Yeah.
you know. Although now more and more of them have cell phones.
Yeah, well, just because it's just
you have to. But
it's so convenient.
But yeah, but one thing though I think that's interesting though is a lot of the interest in Eastern spirituality is on the West Coast. So, you know, like a lot of like Apple's founder Steve Jobs was into like Hinduism, Zen Buddhism, whatever, and that was really popular on the West Coast, and all these new cult religion kind of things.
Yeah, and I would also say that Catholicism's really big on the West Coast too.
Yeah, I would say Catholicism is also big on the East Coast because of all the Italians.
Yeah.
Whereas the Western European white people are Anglicans.
Yeah.
So from England,
you get a lot of like the Protestants and stuff.
Yeah.
For me, when I think of the South, I think Baptist.
Dude, yeah.
Like
handling snakes and like yeah.
So for those of you who are wondering like what all these terms are, these are all like different subsects of Christianity.
Yeah.
Like people really underestimate how big Christianity is in the US.
Yeah.
Like still the vast majority of the United States, as much as people really want to say they're atheist, the vast majority of the US is still Christian.
Yeah.
Like it's not even close.
Yeah.
And so but it's weird because these different Christian groups are so different from each other that they kind of just end up forming their own identity. And they kind of just end up being like almost even a different religion.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's also a lot of it is based on, like I said, your ethnicity. So probably one of the reasons why you think there's lots of Catholic churches is because your family is Irish.
Yeah,
and Irish Catholic. Those things go hand in hand. Like,
that's fair.
Like drinking and smoking.
We also have a lot of Southeast Asians.
Okay.
On the West Coast, specifically Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipinos kind of are more Pacific Islander, but because of those populations, which are like 90% Catholic.
Yeah.
If they're part Christian. Of a Christian religion.
Yeah.
Because of that, you see a lot of Catholics also.
Yeah. You know, you and then you have a lot more Protestants on the East Coast. You do have actually a lot of Catholics got persecuted when they first came to the United States because everyone was anti-Catholic. And actually
trying to get away from the Catholics.
And actually John F. Kennedy in his election to president, that was quite controversial because he was the first Catholic president of the United States.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah. They were like, that's not okay. Having a Catholic, is he going to sell us over to the Pope?
Wow, really?
Yeah. Yeah. It was
so there was no Catholics before him, huh?
Yeah. I mean, as president, yeah. Yeah, because it was always like a reaction against the Catholic Church that came here, you know? But then, you know, what's funny is, you know, we talk about Baptists too, but there was, you know, Southern Baptists are the kind of the crazy Baptists that speak in tongues and stuff. So I found out recently why they're called Southern Baptists, because they were the Baptists that supported slavery. And so they separated from the Northern Baptists and they became the Southern Baptist Convention because they're the Baptists that believe in slavery.
Wow, ironic.
Yeah.
Because like, I would say, like I said, I've never been to these regions, but like from how it appears like the vast majority of the like Black American population that's in the South is Southern Baptist.
Yeah, because of the slave masters. The slave masters brought in.
Man.
They gave them an edited Bible that like got rid of those scriptures about freedom.
It's just like, the Bible says you're meant to do this.
Basically.
I can't control this.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane.
Man. But I think we've been talking about this topic for a while. I think this is a good place to stop before we talk more about slavery. We can say that for another topic, but what are we going to talk about next? Do you remember?
No. What was it?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about how Japanese and American people think about money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very excited to talk about that.
I'll see you then.